The sun dipped below the jagged horizon, painting the sky in hues of burnt orange and deep violet as the dusty streets of Redemption Creek settled into the quiet of dusk. The town, nestled between the arid plains and the towering mesas, was the kind of place where secrets were buried deeper than the gold veins rumored to lie beneath the earth. The saloons hummed with the low murmur of card games and the clink of whiskey glasses, while the sheriff's office stood like a silent sentinel at the end of Main Street, its wooden planks worn smooth by years of boots and bad news. Inside the sheriff's office, the air was thick with the scent of gun oil and old leather. Sheriff Elias Calloway sat behind his desk, his broad shoulders hunched slightly as he pored over a stack of wanted posters. His daughter, Lila, stood by the window, her fingers tracing the condensation on the glass. She was 19, with a wildness in her green eyes that belied the prim dresses her father insisted she wear. Her chestnut hair, always half escaping its pins, caught the last rays of sunlight like a halo of fire. "You ought to be home by now, Lila," Elias grumbled without looking up. "Ain't safe for a girl to be out after dark, not with the kind of men ridin' through these parts." Lila turned, her lips curling into a smirk. "I ain't scared of no drifters, Pa. Besides, I can handle a rifle better'n most of your deputies." Elias sighed, rubbing the stubble on his chin. He knew she was right, but that didn't make the worry sit any lighter in his gut. Lila had a way of drawing trouble like a magnet, and Redemption Creek had more than its share of it. Just that morning, word had come in about the Blackwood twins, outlaws with a reputation for leaving chaos in their wake. They were said to be riding toward town, and Elias had a bad feeling about what that meant. The door creaked open, and Deputy Harlan stuck his head in. "Sheriff, we got company." Two riders just rolled in, looking like they'd been Che-Win on nails and spittin' rust. Elias stood, his hand instinctively resting on the Colt at his hip. "Blackwoods." Harlan nodded. "If they ain't, they sure as hell got the same taste for mischief." Lila's curiosity got the better of her. She stepped out onto the porch, her father's warnings fading into the background. The street was bathed in the golden glow of lanterns, and there, tied to the hitching post outside the saloon, were two black stallions, their flanks glistening with sweat. The men dismounting were mirror images of each other, tall, lean, with sharp features and eyes that missed nothing. They moved with the easy confidence of men who knew they were feared, their dusters flaring slightly as they turned toward the sheriff's office. Lila's breath hitched. She'd heard the stories, how the Blackwood twins, Caleb and Jesse, had ridden into towns and left them in shambles, how they played by their own rules and answered to no one. But seeing them in the flesh was something else entirely. There was a magnetism to them, a dangerous allure that made her pulse quicken despite herself. Caleb, the elder by a mere 5 minutes, tipped his hat in her direction. His smile was slow, deliberate, and sent a shiver down her spine. "Evenin', darlin'," he drawled, his voice like gravel under boot heels. "Ain't seen you round these parts before." Lila lifted her chin. "That's 'cause I ain't one of your saloon girls, Blackwood." Jesse chuckled, his gaze just as intense as his brother's. "No, I reckon you ain't. But you sure got the fire of one." Elias stepped out beside her, his expression darkening. "That's my daughter you're talkin' to, boys. And I don't take kindly to strangers gettin' familiar." Caleb's smile didn't waver, but there was a glint in his eyes that suggested he wasn't about to back down. "No offense meant, Sheriff. Just admirin' the local scenery." The tension between the men was thick enough to cut with a knife, but Lila felt something else entirely, a spark, a challenge. She'd spent her life under her father's watchful eye, sheltered from the kind of excitement that made her blood sing. The Blackwood twins represented everything she'd been denied: freedom, danger, the thrill of the unknown. As the night deepened, the saloon's piano struck up a raucous tune, and the twins sauntered inside, their boots thudding against the wooden floorboards. Lila watched them go, her mind racing. She knew she should listen to her father, should stay far away from men like them. But for the first time in her life, she wanted to do something just for herself, something reckless, something wild. Elias turned to her, his voice low. "You stay away from them, you hear? They ain't nothin' but trouble." Lila met his gaze, her own resolve hardening. "I ain't a child anymore, Pa. I can take care of myself." But as she turned and walked back into the office, she couldn't shake the feeling that the night was far from over, and that the Blackwood twins had just set something in motion that couldn't be stopped. The saloon was alive with the kind of energy that only came when danger was in the air. The Blackwood twins stood at the bar, their backs to the room, but their presence dominated it all the same. Caleb leaned against the counter, swirling a glass of whiskey between his fingers, while Jesse kept his gaze fixed on the mirror behind the bar, watching the room with the sharp eyes of a man who trusted no one. The piano player's tune was lively, but it did little to mask the undercurrent of unease that rippled through the crowd. Lila lingered near the doorway, her heart pounding. She told herself she was just there to keep an eye on things, to make sure the twins didn't cause any trouble. But the truth was, she couldn't stay away. There was something about them, something that made her feel more alive than she ever had before. Caleb turned slightly, catching her reflection in the mirror. His lips curved into a knowing smile. "Sheriff's daughter," he said, his voice low but carrying over the noise of the saloon. "You got a name, or do we just call you Trouble?" Lila stepped forward, her chin lifted. "Lila Calloway. And I ain't here to cause trouble. I'm here to make sure you don't." Jesse chuckled, turning to face her fully. "Ain't that a shame? We were hopin' for a little excitement." The bartender, a grizzled old man named Gus, slid a glass of water toward Lila. "You best be careful, girl," he muttered under his breath. "Them two got a reputation for leavin' nothin' but chaos in their wake." Lila ignored him, her eyes locked on Caleb. "What brings you to Redemption Creek? We ain't exactly on the way to anywhere." Caleb took a slow sip of his whiskey, his gaze never leaving hers. "Maybe we just heard tell of a certain sheriff's daughter who's got more fire than the rest of this town put together." Lila felt her cheeks flush, but she didn't look away. "You hear wrong. I ain't nothin' special." Jesse leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Oh, I don't know about that. I reckon there's a whole lot more to you than meets the eye." The air between them crackled with something unspoken, something that made Lila's pulse race. She knew she should leave, knew her father would be furious if he found her here. But she couldn't bring herself to walk away. Across the room, a group of cowboys had been watching the exchange with growing interest. One of them, a burly man with a scar running down his cheek, stood up and staggered toward them. "Well, well," he slurred, his breath reeking of whiskey. "If it ain't the famous Blackwood twins. Heard you two were nothin' but trouble." Caleb's expression darkened. "You hearin' things again, McCoy? Might want to get that checked." McCoy's hand twitched toward the revolver at his hip. "I ain't afraid of you, Blackwood. And I don't take kindly to strangers comin' into my town and thinkin' they can take what they want." Jesse sighed, rolling his shoulders as if preparing for a fight. "You always were a fool, McCoy. But if you're itchin' for a lesson, we're happy to oblige." Lila stepped between them, her hands raised. "Enough. This ain't the time or the place for this." McCoy's eyes flicked to her, a sneer twisting his lips. "And what's a little girl like you gonna do about it?" Before Lila could respond, Caleb moved. His hand shot out, grabbing McCoy by the collar and slamming him against the bar. The room fell silent, all eyes on the twins. "You watch your mouth," Caleb growled, his voice dangerously quiet. "Or I'll watch it for you." McCoy's face paled, but he didn't back down. "You're makin' a mistake, Blackwood. This town ain't yours to rule." Jesse stepped forward, his hand resting on the butt of his revolver. "Maybe not. But it ain't yours either." The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Lila knew if she didn't do something, blood would be spilled before the night was over. She turned to Gus, her voice low and urgent. "Get the sheriff. Now." Gus nodded and slipped out the back door, leaving Lila to face the twins and McCoy alone. She took a deep breath, stepping between them once more. "This ends now. McCoy, you walk away. Blackwoods, you finish your drinks and leave. No one needs to get hurt." Caleb studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he released McCoy, shoving him back with a smirk. "You heard the lady. Run along, McCoy." before you do something stupid. McCoy glared at them, his hand still hovering over his revolver. But he knew when he was outmatched. With a final sneer, he turned and stumbled back to his table, his pride wounded but his life intact. The saloon exhaled, the tension easing as the piano player struck up a new tune. Lila let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding, her hands trembling slightly. She turned to the twins, her voice barely above a whisper. "You two are a menace." Jesse grinned, raising his glass in a mock toast. "And yet, here you are, standing right beside us." Lila opened her mouth to retort, but the sound of the saloon doors swinging open cut her off. Her father stood in the doorway, his expression thunderous. "Lila," he barked, his voice carrying over the noise of the room. "Get over here. Now." Lila hesitated, her eyes flicking between the twins and her father. She knew she was in for a lecture, knew she'd be lucky if she wasn't locked in her room for a week. But as she turned to leave, Caleb's voice stopped her. "See you round, Lila Calloway." She didn't look back, but she could feel their eyes on her as she walked away, her father's hand gripping her arm tightly. The night was far from over, and she had a feeling that the Blackwood twins weren't done with Redemption Creek, or with her, just yet. The walk back to the sheriff's office was silent, the weight of Elias Calloway's disappointment pressing down on Lila like a physical force. She could feel the anger radiating off him, but she didn't regret what she'd done. For the first time in her life, she'd stood her ground, not as the sheriff's daughter, but as herself. And that meant something. Elias didn't speak until they were inside the office, the door shut firmly behind them. "What in the blazes were you thinking, Lila?" he demanded, his voice rough with frustration. "You know what kind of men those Blackwoods are. They ain't nothing but trouble, and you waltz right into the middle of it like you got something to prove." Lila met his gaze, her own frustration bubbling to the surface. "I was thinking that someone had to stop McCoy from getting himself killed. Those twins weren't looking for a fight, Pa. They were just standing their ground." Elias scoffed, running a hand through his graying hair. "You don't know nothing about 'em, girl. They ride into towns like this, stir up chaos, and ride out leaving bodies in their wake. And you just stood there like you were one of 'em." Lila crossed her arms, her voice steady. "I ain't a child anymore. I can handle myself." Elias's expression softened slightly, but his voice was firm. "It ain't about handling yourself. It's about knowing when to walk away. Those men ain't like us, Lila. They don't play by the same rules." Lila turned away, her gaze drifting to the window. Outside, the town was quiet, the saloon's lights flickering in the distance. She could still feel the weight of Caleb's gaze on her, the way Jesse's voice had sent a shiver down her spine. She knew her father was right, knew the Blackwoods were dangerous. But she also knew she couldn't just ignore the way they made her feel. Elias sighed, his voice softer now. "I just don't want to see you get hurt, Lila. You're all I got left." Lila's heart ached at the sadness in his voice. She knew he was thinking of her mother, gone these past 5 years, and the way the town had changed since then. She turned back to him, her voice gentle. "I know, Pa. But I can't spend my whole life hiding behind your badge. I gotta live, too." Elias didn't answer, but the tension in his shoulders eased slightly. He knew she was right, even if he didn't want to admit it. The night wore on, and Lila found herself unable to sleep. She sat on the porch of their small house on the edge of town, the stars above her bright and endless. The air was cool, the kind of quiet that only came in the early hours of the morning, when the world seemed to hold its breath. She didn't hear the footsteps until they were right in front of her. She looked up, her heart skipping a beat as Caleb stepped into the dim light of the lantern hanging by the door. He was alone, his expression unreadable in the shadows. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked, his voice low. Lila swallowed, her pulse quickening. "What are you doing here, Caleb?" He leaned against the porch railing, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Just wanted to make sure you were all right. Your pa's got a way of making a man feel like he's overstepped his bounds." Lila let out a short laugh. "That's 'cause he usually has." Caleb turned to her, his eyes reflecting the starlight. "You're not like the rest of this town, Lila Calloway. You got fire in you. And that's a rare thing." Lila felt her cheeks warm, but she didn't look away. "And what if I do? What does it matter to you?" Caleb stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "It matters, 'cause I ain't met a woman like you before. One who ain't afraid to stand up to men like me and my brother." Lila's breath caught in her throat. She knew she should send him away, knew her father would be furious if he found Caleb here. But she couldn't bring herself to do it. Instead, she met his gaze, her voice steady. "And what if I ain't afraid of you, Caleb Blackwood?" Caleb's smile was slow, dangerous. "Then maybe you're the one we've been looking for." Lila's heart pounded, but she didn't back down. "And what does that mean?" Before Caleb could answer, the sound of hoofbeats echoed in the distance. Jesse rode up to the house, his expression urgent. "We gotta go, Caleb. Now." Caleb's gaze lingered on Lila for a moment longer, then he nodded. "Duty calls, it seems." Lila stood, her voice barely above a whisper. "You leavin' town?" Caleb tipped his hat, his smile tinged with regret. "For now. But we'll be back, Lila Calloway. And when we do, I reckon you'll have a choice to make." Lila watched as the two brothers mounted their horses and rode off into the night, their figures swallowed by the darkness. She didn't know what the future held, didn't know if she'd ever see them again. But one thing was certain, her life would never be the same. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, Lila stood at the edge of town, watching the empty road stretch out before her. The Blackwood twins were gone, but their presence lingered, a promise of something more than the quiet life she'd always known. Elias found her there, his expression resigned. "They're gone." Lila nodded. "For now." Elias sighed, his voice weary. "I ain't gonna tell you what to do, Lila. You're a grown woman, and you got a right to make your own choices. But I will say this, be careful. Men like them don't change. And they don't stay." Lila turned to him, her voice soft. "I know, Pa. But maybe I don't want to stay either." Elias didn't answer, but he didn't argue. He just stood beside her, watching the sun rise over Redemption Creek, and wondered what the future held for them both.